The cold of the northeast Chinese winter in 1977 was a familiar enemy, biting through my thin padded jacket with practiced ease. But the chill I felt as I stood in the crowd that morning was something else entirely. A deep, soul-deep freeze that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the scene unfolding before me. The brigade loudspeakers, crackling with static, horribly mangled the name of the last educated youth granted permission to return to the city. And there he was, my childhood sweetheart, Liu Zhang. He stood in front of everyone, the center of a painful drama, holding the application form that represented freedom, a future, a destiny. And he was handing it not to me, his promised fiancée, but to her, to Clara Wang. Clara was sobbing, tears streaming artistically down her face, making her delicate features even more pitiable. Leo's hand found mine, his grip tight, his eyes pools of manufactured guilt. "Mei Lin," he whispered, his voice thick with a false sorrow that made my stomach turn. "Wait for me. Just 2 years. Once I'm settled in the city, I'll come back for you. I promise. Clara, she's so fragile. I can't rest easy leaving her here alone." The words were a ghost, an echo from a lifetime ago. In my last life I had believed those empty vows. I had clung to them like a lifeline, waiting, withering away in this frozen hinterland until a harsh winter and a broken heart conspired to end me. Just before the darkness took me, I'd heard the news. He and Clara had married not long after arriving in the city. They had children. They were the celebrated golden couple, their love story an inspiration. And I was nothing more than the foolish, forgotten prologue, the country bumpkin who didn't know when her story was over. Now, looking at his deceitful face, the handsome features I had once loved, all I felt was a profound and twisting disgust. Calmly, with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I pulled my hand from his. I said nothing. Not a single word. I turned my back on him, on Clara, on the gawking villagers, and I forced my way through the crowd. My destination was the gnarled old willow tree at the village entrance. Beneath it, waiting anxiously, was Auntie Ma, the brigade's most determined matchmaker. Her eyes widened as I approached, my expression unreadable. "Auntie Ma," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "About the Chin family's proposal." "I agree." The wrinkles on her face blossomed into a smile like a crumpled chrysanthemum. "Oh, Mei Lin. You've really come to your senses. Let me tell you, that Chin boy may have an injured leg, but he's a proper battalion-level officer. If you marry him, you'll be an officer's wife. You'll never worry about food or clothing again. So many girls would envy you." She hadn't even finished her effusive praise when Leo's furious shout came from behind me. "Mei Lin. Are you insane?" He rushed over, his face a mask of confusion and rage. He clamped his hand around my wrist, his grip so strong I felt the fine bones grind together. His eyes were bloodshot, blazing with an anger that was laced with a fear he didn't even recognize. "Do you even know what you're saying? Junchin is a cripple. You'll be stuck washing the sheets of a useless man for the rest of your life. Just to spite me, you'd throw your own future away." Clara hurried after him, clutching weakly at his sleeve, her eyes red-rimmed as she looked at me with a pitiful desperation that was as transparent as glass. "Mei Lin, please don't blame Leo. It's all my fault. If you're angry, then hit me, scold me, but please don't joke about your own happiness like this." It was a moving performance, a touching act of deep affection and self-sacrifice. The villagers watching began to whisper, their voices a susurrus of judgment and pity. "She's lost her mind. Who wouldn't snap? Of all men to choose, she picks the half-dead soldier from the military compound. They say his temper is monstrous." I glared coldly at the shameless pair, then shook off Leo's hand with a sharp twist. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried, clear and sharp, to every ear present. "First," I said, my gaze locked on Leo, "the return quota is yours. Whom you give it to is your choice. I have no right to interfere. Second," I continued, my eyes sweeping the crowd, "whom I marry is my choice, and it has nothing to do with you." I paused, letting the silence hang for a moment before shifting my gaze to Clara, who shrank back as if struck. "And lastly, I am not acting out of spite, nor am I joking. Comrade Junchin is a war hero who defended our country. He is not useless. Show him some respect." With that, I turned my back on them, my face as hard as stone, and looked at Auntie Ma. "Auntie, please. Let's go to the Chin family right now and give them our answer." "All right," she responded, her voice booming with a triumphant energy as if afraid I might change my mind. We turned and walked away, leaving the stunned crowd behind. Leo's enraged voice rang out after me, cracking with emotion. Mei Lin. You'll regret this. You'll definitely regret this. But I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone what true regret felt like. It was the regret of my past life, placing all my hope on him, only to die in despair after endless waiting and a slow, consuming illness. I would not make that mistake again. Jun Chen was the only son of the Deputy Chief of Staff of the Harbin Military District. At just 25, he was already a decorated battalion-level operations officer. If it hadn't been for a border clash a year ago where he was wounded protecting his comrades, his future would have been limitless. Now confined to a wheelchair, he had withdrawn from the front lines, his nature growing withdrawn and cold. In the military compound, he had become someone everyone pitied yet avoided. To find him someone who could care for him, the Chin family had spread the word. Any girl willing to marry him would be granted an urban household registration, a stable job and a generous dowry. But even with such tempting conditions, few were willing. Who would risk her entire life marrying a man whose legs were disabled and whose temper was notoriously difficult? Auntie Ma had cast her net wide before finally landing on me, the orphaned, rootless educated youth with no father, no mother and no one to rely on. In my previous life I had seen this proposal as the ultimate humiliation. I had rejected it outright, stubbornly waiting for a ghost. This time, however, this marriage was my only springboard, my only chance to escape this land and break free of my doomed fate. Auntie Ma worked with remarkable speed. That very afternoon she brought the Chin family's reply and the betrothal gifts to my dorm at the educated youth station. 300 yuan, several bolts of fine cloth and piles of candy and pastries. In an era where the average monthly income was barely 30 yuan, this was an undeniable fortune. The person in charge of the station stared wide-eyed at the dowry, his avarice warring with his pity. He immediately approved a 3-day leave for me and told me to prepare for the wedding. When the news spread, the entire station exploded. Some sympathized, some sneered, but most were eaten up with a raw, green envy. 300 yuan. I couldn't earn that in 10 years. She's stepping straight into heaven. A city resident overnight. Not just that, she'll be an officer's wife. Takes luck to land a deal like that. But what's the point of spending your life with a... I ignored all the gossip. Quietly, I packed the few belongings I had. An old wooden trunk, a handful of faded clothes, and the pair of gold bangles my mother had left me. In my past life, I had sold those bangles to scrape together travel expenses for Leo, only to later discover he hadn't needed that money at all. He had only wanted to test the depth of my devotion. How laughable. That night Leo came to me again. He looked haggard, his chin covered in stubble, his eyes bloodshot. He blocked my doorway, his body tense. Mei Lin, stop this nonsense and come back with me, he rasped. I'm not making trouble, I said calmly, meeting his gaze. You're still mad at me. He grew agitated, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I admit I was wrong to give the quota to Clara, but I had no choice. He has a heart condition. The doctor said she couldn't stay in the countryside any longer. I couldn't just stand by and watch her die. The same excuses. The same hollow justifications. In my last life, I had been deceived by that false tenderness, foolish enough to believe he was a man of loyalty and righteousness. Only later did I learn that Clara's heart was perfectly healthy. Healthy enough to give him a son and a daughter. Healthy enough to share in his wealth and glory and live to a ripe old age. That's your concern, Liu Zhang, I said coldly. We are finished. No, we're not. He shook his head stubbornly, his eyes pleading. Mei Lin, believe me, you're the one I love. Wait for me 2 years at most. I swear I'll come back and marry you in grand style. That won't be necessary, I said, sidestepping him and trying to shut the door. I'm getting married in 3 days. You don't need to concern yourself with me anymore. But he pressed hard against the door, his face twisted in pain, his voice raw. Mei Lin, must you ruin yourself like this? What can he give you? He's not even a real man. That was the spark. The anger I had swallowed for 2 lifetimes ignited, white-hot and pure. I snapped my head up, my eyes sharp as blades. I don't know if he can give me happiness, I said, my voice low and venomous. But I do know this. He won't tell me he loves me while handing the chance to live to someone else. Liu Zhang, take your cheap affection and your empty promises away. They disgust me. With every ounce of strength in my body I slammed the door. The resounding bang was a period at the end of our story. I shut his shocked and wounded face outside, leaning my back against the rough wood as silence settled, heavy and long. Then came the sound of his defeated footsteps, shuffling away into the night. I slid down to the floor, the cold seeping through my clothes. At last the tears came. They were not for him, not for the love I had lost, but as a belated final farewell to the hopelessly foolish girl I had been in my past life. That girl was gone. I had buried her in the snow myself. 3 days later the wedding took place right on schedule. There was no elaborate ceremony, no hall full of guests. The Chin family sent a jeep to fetch me. The driver was a young orderly named Xiao Wang. I put on a brand new red polyester shirt, a gift Auntie Ma had prepared, and braided my hair neatly into 2 long plaits. Sitting in the jolting jeep, I watched the fields and villages fly by outside the window, my heart unusually calm. This was the place where I had poured out 8 years of my youth, the place I once thought would be my grave in a foreign land. Now I was finally leaving it behind. Liu Zhang did not appear. I heard that he and Clara Wang had boarded the train to the city just the day before. That was fine. Out of sight, out of mind. The jeep drove me straight into the legendary military compound. Red brick buildings with green tiled roofs, clean cement roads, soldiers in uniform coming and going, children laughing and playing in the yards. Everything here was a stark contrast to the muddy, chaotic life I had known. It was a world of order and discipline, and it felt like another planet. The vehicle stopped in front of a 2-story house that seemed quieter than the others. "We're here, ma'am," Xiao Wang said, lifting my trunk for me, his face carrying a trace of unmistakable pity. "This is Staff Officer Chen's home." I nodded, a tight ball of nervousness forming in my stomach. I pushed open the worn iron gate and walked inside. The yard was bare, holding only a few leafless trees and a pile of miscellaneous junk in the corner, giving off a desolate, lonely air. The doors of the house were tightly shut, and the entire place radiated a coldness that warned strangers away. This was to be my new home. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside the light was dim. A faint smell of disinfectant mixed with medicinal herbs filled the air. The furnishings were sparse. A simple table, a few chairs, a calligraphy scroll on the wall that read, "Serve the country with utmost loyalty." And there, by the window, a man sat with his back to me in a wheelchair. He wore a faded old military uniform. His frame was lean but straight, and even in his seated position, it was easy to imagine the commanding presence he must once have carried. Sunlight poured through the glass, outlining him in a golden glow, but it did nothing to melt the layer of cold desolation that clung to him like a shroud. He didn't turn around. Only spoke coldly, his voice brittle as ice and hoarse from disuse. "Put the things down and leave." I froze for a second, then understood. He must have thought I was a delivery person or perhaps the new hired help. I set my trunk by the door and walked toward him, my footsteps soft on the wooden floor. I tried to make my voice as gentle as possible, a stark contrast to the harshness of his. "Hello," I said. "My name is Mei Lin. From today on I'm your wife." At that he finally turned his head slowly. The moment I saw his face, my breath caught in my throat. I had heard that Junchen was handsome, but I hadn't imagined he would look like this. His features were sharply cut, every line precise and defined. His brows were thick and strong, his nose high and straight, his jawline a firm, clean angle. But it was his eyes that held me. They were dark, deep as a still midnight pool, and in them there was no light, no emotion at all. Only a dead, inky emptiness. His skin was pale from a long absence of sunlight, and his thin lips were pressed tightly together. He was like a magnificent eagle whose wings had been brutally broken, fallen into the dust, yet he still carried a proud and aloof bearing that refused to be extinguished. His eyes swept over me, sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, as though dissecting me, judging my worth, my motives, my very soul. After a long, suffocating moment, the corner of his lips tugged into a cold, mocking smile. "A wife," he said, the word dripping with sarcasm. "Who sells herself to a cripple just for an urban household registration. How pragmatic of you." His words were meant to be cutting, to push me away. But I didn't get angry. I saw through the thorns to the raw, bleeding vulnerability beneath. Once he had been the favored son of heaven. Now he had fallen to this, his pride crushed, having to rely on his parents to bargain for a wife with promises of money and benefits. I met his icy gaze with a calmness that seemed to surprise him. "Comrade Junshin," I said, my voice even. "Let's make a deal." He raised his brows, a flicker of genuine surprise in the dead depths of his eyes. "A deal? I know you don't want this marriage," I continued. "And you don't want a stranger disrupting your life. I don't want to use marriage to tie you down either. So we can come to an agreement." I held up 2 fingers. 2 years. We'll be husband and wife in name only for 2 years. During that time I'll do my best to take care of your daily needs and play the role of your wife. After 2 years, if you still can't accept me, or if you find someone more suitable, we'll divorce. By then I'll have my registration and a job and I can live independently. We'll both get what we need. Neither of us will owe the other anything. He stared at me in silence, his dark eyes deepening as he weighed the truth of my words. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of a clock from another room. After a long, tense pause, he finally spoke, his voice slow and measured. "You're sharper than I expected." "I'm just practical," I replied evenly. "Fine." He gave a short, sharp nod. "The room on the west side is mine. The east side is yours. Without my permission, don't enter my room." He turned his wheelchair so his back was to me again, a clear dismissal. "And another thing. I don't like noise. Keep your mouth under control." "Okay," I agreed readily. "And," he added without looking back, "I don't eat onions, ginger, garlic, cilantro, or fatty meat." Such a picky list of demands from a man who had just accepted a wife out of convenience. I bit back the urge to roll my eyes and simply nodded at his back. "Got it." He said nothing more. He maneuvered his wheelchair into the west bedroom and slammed the door shut with a definitive bang. Staring at the tightly closed door, I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and shrugged helplessly. Clearly life with my new husband was not going to be easy. But that was fine. I had patience. And I had a plan. Rolling up my sleeves, I turned to face the cold, desolate house. It was time to get to work. The slam of the door echoed in the sparse living room, a sound of finality. I was alone. I stood there for a long moment, simply breathing in the silence and the faint, sterile scent of medicine that clung to the air. This was it. My new life. My fresh start, built on a foundation of a transaction with a man who seemed carved from ice and bitterness. I looked around. A thin layer of dust coated every surface, muting the colors of the wood and the few simple furnishings. It wasn't just untidy, it was unloved. It was the home of someone who had given up on living, who saw his surroundings as nothing more than a waiting room. Well, I was no longer waiting. I was here. I started with my own room on the east side. It was small and plain, holding only a wooden bed with a thin mattress and a chipped, empty wardrobe. But it was mine. A space of my own, a sanctuary. I unpacked my meager belongings, placing the faded clothes in the wardrobe and setting the small wooden box containing my mother's gold bangles on the bedside table. They were my last tangible connection to a past before Leo, before the heartache, a reminder of a love that was real and unconditional. I would not sell them this time. They were my insurance, my secret strength. Then I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. I found a bucket and a rag under the kitchen sink and I drew water from the tap, the cold liquid stinging my hands. I started wiping, scrubbing, sweeping. I began in my room, moving every piece of furniture to clean behind it, wiping down the window until it sparkled. The physical labor was a balm, a way to quiet the whirlwind of emotions in my chest. The residual anger at Leo, the nervousness about this new arrangement, the faint, stubborn flicker of hope. I moved to the living room, dusting the table and chairs, carefully cleaning the calligraphy scroll that spoke of loyalty to a country that had, in his eyes, left him behind. The kitchen was the worst. It was cold and disused, the stove seeming to sigh with neglect. There were only a few bundles of dried noodles and some hard, stale buns in the cupboard. It was a pantry of despair. He hadn't just been living alone. He'd been starving himself, body and soul. I worked non-stop for hours, my muscles aching, a fine sheen of sweat on my brow. But as I worked, the house began to change. The windows let in more light, the wooden floors regained a faint sheen, the air began to lose its stale, medicinal smell and instead carried the clean scent of soap and water. It was a transformation not just of a house but of an atmosphere. I was breathing life back into this place, one scrubbed floorboard at a time. By the time I finished, the sky outside had softened into the deep blues and purples of dusk. My stomach growled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since morning. I thought of the stale buns and felt a surge of determination. That would not be our first meal as husband and wife, even in name only. From my trunk, I pulled out my most precious commodities. A piece of cured pork and a little pouch of white flour, parting gifts from the few friends I had at the youth station. After a moment's thought, I decided on hand-pulled noodles. It was comforting, hearty, and most importantly, it could be made simply. I mixed the dough, kneading it until it was smooth and elastic, the repetitive motion calming. I let it rest while I diced the precious pork and washed the last few leafy greens I'd seen in a basket by the back door. A forgotten gift from a neighbor, perhaps. I rolled the dough out, my hands remembering skills learned from a lifetime ago in a different kitchen, and sliced it into neat strips. Soon, the kitchen was filled with the rich, savory aroma of stir-fried pork and the comforting steam of boiling noodles. I set 2 steaming bowls on the small table in the living room, the simple porcelain looking almost cheerful in the newly cleaned space. Just as I finished, the door to the west bedroom opened. Junchin wheeled himself out. He must have been drawn by the smell, or perhaps simply by the gnawing emptiness of his own stomach. He stopped short when he saw the table set for 2, the food waiting. His eyes flickered from the bowls to me, his expression unreadable. "Come eat," I said, pulling out a chair for myself. He didn't answer. He maneuvered his chair silently to the table, his movements precise and controlled. I had been careful. I had picked out every single speck of green onion and cilantro from his bowl, remembering his list of aversions. He looked down at the white noodles, the bright green vegetables, and the glistening red cubes of pork. Something flickered in his eyes, too fast for me to name. Surprise, perhaps, or a faint, long-dormant appreciation. He picked up his chopsticks, lifted a strand of noodles, hesitated for a fraction of a second, and then put it into his mouth. He chewed slowly. Then his movements didn't stop. He ate steadily, purposefully until the bowl was empty. He even lifted the bowl and drank the broth down to the last drop. That was our first meal as husband and wife. We exchanged no words. The only sounds were the faint clink of chopsticks against porcelain and the quiet sounds of eating. It was a silence filled not with hostility, but with a strange, tentative truce. When he finished, he remained silent, turning his wheelchair to head back to his room. "Wait a second," I called after him. He stopped, turning his head toward me, his brows tightening almost imperceptibly. I could feel his walls going back up, his impatience with my intrusion. "Your legs," I began, choosing my words with extreme care. "Would you let me take a look?" His face darkened instantly. The air in the room grew thick and heavy, suffocating. His gaze cut into me, sharp and cold as an ice blade. "Who gave you the nerve?" he snarled, his voice low and dangerous. I knew I had touched the most sensitive, rawest nerve in his entire being. But I had to. The memory from my past life was a burning brand in my mind. The news shortly after my death of an old village doctor, a recluse who had used a nearly lost acupuncture technique to cure the damaged nerves in the legs of a battle hero. That hero was Junchin. He had not only stood up again but had returned to the army, rising to become a legendary figure. I didn't know where to find that doctor yet, but in my last life, I had learned some basic massage and therapeutic techniques from our barefoot village doctor, initially just to ease Leo's occasional aches from labor. I didn't dare dream of curing Junchin, but perhaps I could help. Perhaps I could slow the muscle atrophy, improve his circulation, and lay some groundwork. It was a debt I felt I owed not to him but to the future I knew was possible. "I don't mean anything else by it," I said, meeting his icy gaze, making my voice as soft and non-threatening as I could. "I learned a few massage techniques from our village doctor. Maybe I could help improve your circulation. Ease the pain a little." "I don't need it." The rejection was cold, hard, and absolute, thick with a resistance that felt like a physical force. "Stop entertaining thoughts you shouldn't have. Just do your part." Without another glance, he wheeled himself back into his room. The slam of the door was even louder this time, a definitive end to the conversation. I looked at that closed door and let out a long, slow, helpless sigh. Conquering this iceberg was going to be a marathon, not a sprint. Over the next few days, a rhythm established itself, a quiet, parallel existence under one roof. I cleaned, I washed clothes, I cooked meals. He remained locked in his room, a silent, brooding presence I only saw at mealtimes or when he went to the outdoor toilet. We exchanged barely 3 sentences in a whole day. His face remained a mask of cold indifference toward me. But he ate. Every meal I cooked, no matter how simple, he finished down to the last grain of rice. It was a small thing, a tiny, almost insignificant victory, but I clung to it. It was a start. He was accepting my care even if he refused to accept me. Life in the military compound was a world away from the communal, often intrusive life of the village. Here people kept to themselves, but there was a polite, orderly distance. Our next-door neighbor was the wife of the division headquarters political commissar, a warm, robust woman in her 50s named Auntie Yang. Everyone called her Sister Yang. She had a kind face and eyes that missed nothing. Seeing me busy alone, hanging laundry or sweeping the courtyard, she often came over to the low fence that separated our yards to chat, sometimes bringing fresh vegetables from her own garden. "Maylin, you're really a good girl," she said to me one afternoon, watching me weed the small, neglected patch of earth that might once have been a vegetable bed. "It's June's blessing to have married you." I smiled, wiping a bead of sweat from my temple. "You flatter me, Sister Yang." "It's not flattery at all," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "You don't know. Ever since June came back injured, he's like a different person. He used to be such a bright, cheerful young man. Always laughing, full of energy. Now," she sighed, a world of sorrow in that single sound. "His parents worry themselves sick. They even hired 2 caretakers before, but both of them left within a week, furious with him. The fact that you can endure his bad temper is no small thing." "I understand he has bitterness in his heart," I said softly, feeling a genuine pang of sympathy for the ghost of the man he used to be. Just then a sharp, mocking voice sliced through the quiet afternoon. "Oh my Sister Yang, here you are again, teaching the new bride how to be the perfect wife and mother." We both turned. At the gate stood a middle-aged woman wearing a gaudy floral shirt, her lips curved in a smirk as she watched us. It was Mrs. Liu, the wife of the logistics director, and the compound's most notorious gossip. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, swept over me from head to toe. Sister Yang's friendly face darkened instantly. "Lu Hong, watch your mouth." Mrs. Liu curled her lip, her gaze lingering on me with open disdain. "So this is Staff Officer Chen's new little bride. Pretty enough, I'll give her that." She paused, letting the silence hang. "But I wonder how it feels spending every day stuck with a patient." She bit down hard on the word patient, the malice dripping from her tone like poison. Before I could even form a response, Sister Yang shot up from where she was leaning on the fence, her plump face flushed with fury. "Lu Hong, what nonsense are you spouting? Junshin is a hero. If you dare slander him again, I'll tear that foul mouth of yours apart." "What nonsense? I'm just stating the obvious," Mrs. Liu said with feigned innocence, though her eyes gleamed with satisfaction at having provoked a reaction. "Everyone in the compound knows his legs are ruined. This little wife of his is nothing more than a caretaker. Or maybe..." Her eyes gleamed with a particular cruelty. "She only married in for the Qin family's power and status." Sister Yang trembled with rage, looking as if she were about to charge through the fence at her. I quickly put a hand on her arm to hold her back. A cold calm had settled over me. This was a battle I needed to fight for myself. I turned to Mrs. Liu, meeting her sneering gaze head-on, and I smiled. A sweet, placid smile that seemed to confuse her. "You're right, Mrs. Liu," I said, my voice clear and carrying. Both she and Sister Yang froze in shock. Mrs. Liu clearly hadn't expected me to admit it so bluntly, and for a moment she was at a loss for words. I continued slowly, my smile never wavering. "Junshin is a battle hero. And his father, the deputy chief of staff, is a great man who defended our country. To marry into such a heroic, respected family, well, that's a fortune earned over several lifetimes." I let my gaze sweep over her cheap floral shirt. "Unlike some people who marry a warehouse manager and suddenly think they're somebody, spending their days gossiping about others. Aren't you afraid the wind will twist your tongue right off? You're calling my husband a warehouse manager." Mrs. Liu's face turned the color of pig liver. Her husband was the logistics director, which, in plain terms, did involve managing warehouses. It was exactly the sore spot she couldn't stand anyone touching. "If you feel the shoe fits, then wear it," I said brightly, my smile widening. "Mrs. Liu, instead of meddling in our household, why not worry more about your own? I heard the higher-ups are going to audit the warehouse accounts soon. You'd better remind Director Liu to be careful or else something might be exposed." I had made that up on the spot, purely to rattle her. But the effect was astonishing. Mrs. Liu's face drained of all color. Panic flickered in her eyes, and her lips trembled as she searched for a retort but found none. At last she only glared at me with pure, undiluted hatred, spat out, "You just wait," and slunk away in a flurry of floral fabric. Sister Yang stared at me dumbfounded before finally bursting into laughter. She raised a thick thumb and exclaimed, "Hey Lin. You're amazing. Just a few words and you shut that viper right up. So satisfying." I only smiled, saying nothing. With people like her, the weaker you acted, the more they pressed their advantage. Only by being sharper and harder than they were could you silence them. What I hadn't expected was that this little clash had an audience of one. As I turned back to the house, I caught a flicker of movement at an upstairs window. The curtain fell back into place. My heart gave a little jump. Junshin. He had been watching. That evening during dinner, Junshin did something unprecedented. He spoke to me first. "About today," he said, his voice still cool, but compared to the usual Arctic tone, there was the faintest hint of something else. Something almost like respect. "Thank you." I was a little surprised, then shook my head. "I didn't do it for you. I just don't like people pointing fingers at me." He glanced at me, a long, considering look, but said nothing more, lowering his head to eat in silence. The atmosphere returned to its usual stillness, but it felt different. Lighter somehow. After dinner, I cleared the table while he started to wheel himself back to his room. "Wait," I called again. He stopped, his shoulders tensing. I could feel his weariness, his expectation of another unwelcome intrusion. I carried over a basin of freshly boiled hot water, the steam rising in a warm cloud. I crouched down in front of him, placing the basin on the floor. Under his startled gaze, I looked up at him. "What are you doing?" His voice was instantly wary, hoarse with tension. "Don't be nervous," I said gently. "I just want to soak your feet in hot water. It can promote circulation. It's good for your legs." His body went rigid as stone. Both hands clamped tight on the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles white. His eyes, when I dared to meet them, were brimming with a storm of resistance, humiliation, and raw, naked pain. I said, "I don't need it." The words were gritted out from between clenched teeth. I didn't back down. I looked straight into those tormented eyes, my voice clear and steady, landing each word with deliberate care. "Junshin, I know what you're thinking. You believe your legs are ruined. You don't want anyone to see them. You don't want anyone to touch them. You think that if you ignore them you can pretend nothing happened." I saw his pupils contract sharply, a flinch of the soul. "But you're only lying to yourself. Your legs are still here. They're a part of your body. The more you run from them, the more they'll become a demon that torments you forever." My voice was soft, but every word landed like a hammer on the fortress of his pride. His jaw clenched, the muscles in his neck corded, veins standing out on his forehead. His eyes were filled with a tumultuous struggle, a war between his ingrained defiance and the terrifying nascent hope that my words might be true. I said nothing more. I simply reached out and gently took hold of his ankle through his trousers. His body jolted violently as though struck by a live wire. His first instinct was a sharp recoil, to pull back into the safety of his isolation. I tightened my grip, not with force but with a firm, steady pressure. I would not let him escape. Not this time. His foot, when I carefully slipped off his shoe and sock, was icy cold, utterly devoid of warmth. The skin was pale, almost waxy from long immobility. I gently lowered his foot into the basin of warm water. The moment the heat enveloped his skin past his ankles, I felt it. A minute relaxation in the terrifying rigidity of his body. It was just a fraction, a barely perceptible yielding. With a towel between my hands and his skin, I began to massage him. Lightly at first, then with more purpose. I started at the yonquan point on the sole of his foot, moving up to his ankle, then carefully, so carefully, up toward his calf muscle. My technique wasn't professional, but I put my whole heart into it, focusing on the feel of the atrophied muscle beneath my fingers, willing warmth and life back into it. He didn't say a word the entire time. He sat as still as a statue, but his body was no longer a block of tense ice. His breathing, which had been shallow and held, quickened little by little. I could feel it, the slow, painful crumbling of the walls he had built around himself, inch by agonizing inch. Just when I thought he would remain silent forever, that this small victory would be a quiet one, his voice came from above my head. It was rough, scraped raw with emotion and filled with a bewildered uncertainty. "Why?" he asked, the single word heavy in the quiet room. I paused my hands but didn't look up, keeping my focus on the task. "Why what? Why are you being so good to me?" The question was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the stillness. This was only a transaction. I finally lifted my head, my hands still resting on his calf, and met his gaze. The dead emptiness was gone, replaced by a complicated swirl of confusion, suspicion, and a vulnerability that made my heart ache. "Because you're my husband," I answered, my voice serious and sincere. "No matter how our beginning looked, as long as we're husband and wife, I will fulfill my duty as a wife." I held his gaze, letting him see the truth in my eyes. "And more than that, you're a hero." That word, hero, seemed to pierce through the last of his defenses. It touched the softest, most hidden and most wounded place in his heart. For a fleeting moment, the ice in his eyes melted completely, revealing the man he used to be, the man who was still in there, trapped and suffering. He quickly turned his head away, refusing to let me see any more. He muttered something so low it was nearly inaudible, gruff and dismissive. But I heard it. "Do as you wish." It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't acceptance. But it was permission. And for now, for this battle in my long war, it was enough. The words, "do as you wish," hung in the air, a grudging surrender that felt more significant than any victory shout. From that day on, the atmosphere in the small house shifted. The air was no longer sharp with unspoken hostility, but carried a tentative, fragile truce. Junchen no longer resisted my presence with the same fierce, bristling intensity. He was still a man of few words, his face often an unreadable mask, but the glacial cold had receded, leaving behind a cool autumnal stillness. Our evenings settled into a new ritual. After dinner, I would prepare the basin of hot water. He would no longer retreat to his room immediately after eating. Instead, he would wait, sometimes reading a book by the window, sometimes just staring out at the darkening courtyard, until I brought the steaming water over. He never acknowledged it, never thanked me, but he also never pulled away. He would sit in stoic silence as I removed his shoes and socks, his body tense but accepting as I lowered his feet into the warmth. I worked in silence, my hands moving methodically from the soles of his feet, up his ankles to his calves. I learned the geography of his injuries. The places where the muscles were knotted and hard, the areas that were frighteningly soft and atrophied, the subtle ropey texture of scar tissue I could feel even through his trousers. I poured all my focus into my hands, imagining the blood flowing, the nerves stirring, the life returning. It was a form of prayer. One evening, about a month after our confrontation with Mrs. Liu, the impossible happened. I was massaging his left leg, my thumb pressing firmly into a point near his knee, a point the village doctor had said was connected to nerve function. I felt a subtle, involuntary twitch beneath my fingers. It was slight, a mere flutter like the faintest tremor of a moth's wing. But we both felt it. My hands stilled. I froze, my head snapping up to look at his face. He had frozen too, his book forgotten in his lap. He was staring down at his leg, his expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. The carefully constructed mask of indifference had shattered, revealing the raw, vulnerable man beneath. "Did it?" I whispered, my voice trembling, afraid to give voice to the hope that was suddenly bursting in my chest. He didn't answer. He just kept staring, his breathing quickened, shallow. The grip he had on the arms of his wheelchair was so tight I could see the white of his knuckles even in the dim light. The air in the room was charged, electric with possibility. Slowly, deliberately, I pressed the same point again. Once, twice, a third time. And there it was again. Unmistakable. A slight but definite twitch in his calf muscle. A sob caught in my throat. Tears, hot and sudden, spilled down my cheeks. I wasn't crying from sadness, but from a profound, overwhelming relief. It was real. The memory from my past life wasn't just a desperate fantasy. There was hope. It moved. I breathed, the words choked. Junchen, it moved. I looked up at him, my vision blurred, and without thinking I reached out and grabbed his hand where it was clenched on the armrest. His whole body was trembling faintly, a fine, almost imperceptible shudder that spoke of emotions too vast to contain. He looked from his leg to my tear-streaked face, and for the first time since I had known him, a flame, a real living flame of hope, flickered to life in the dark, dead emptiness of his eyes. It was small, fragile, but it was there. He turned his hand over, his fingers, cold at first, closing around mine with a surprising, desperate strength. His voice, when he finally spoke, was hoarse, scraped raw, and carried the faintest tremor I had ever heard. "Maylin, thank you." Those two words, so simple, meant more than any grand declaration. They were an acknowledgement, a partnership, a crack in the dam that had held back his entire world. The discovery of that tiny movement cracked through the silent shell of our home like a thunderclap. From that moment on, Junshin was a man transformed. The listless resignation that had clung to him vanished, replaced by a fierce, burning determination. He was no longer a living corpse waiting for the end. He had a goal. He began to cooperate with my treatments of his own accord. He no longer waited for me to bring the water. He would have it ready. During the massages, no matter how much it hurt when I worked on the stiffer muscles, he would clench his jaw and endure it silently, his focus absolute. The passive recipient had become an active participant in his own salvation. And he wanted more. He started talking about rehabilitation exercises. He had been an athlete, a soldier. His body understood movement even if his nerves had forgotten. "Help me try to stand," he said one morning, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. My heart leaped into my throat. "Are you sure? Your legs, they haven't borne weight in over a year." "I'm sure," he said, his gaze steady on mine. "I have to try." And so we began. The process was grueling, humiliating, and physically torturous. I would position myself in front of him, bracing my feet, my hands under his arms. He would grip the arms of his wheelchair, his face a mask of intense concentration, and with a grunt of sheer effort he would push himself up. The first few attempts were catastrophic. His legs, frail and uncoordinated, buckled instantly. He was a dead weight collapsing into me. I was not a large woman, and the force of his fall would send us both stumbling, only my desperate grip on him and the nearby wall preventing a painful crash to the floor. Sweat would soak his clothes within minutes, his arms and back trembling violently from the strain. More than once, after a particularly hard fall that left us both panting on the floor, a look of such profound despair would cross his face that it broke my heart. I could see the temptation to give up, to retreat back into the safe, familiar misery of his wheelchair. But I never let him. "Don't give up, Junshin," I would whisper in his ear, my own body aching as I helped him back into the chair. "You can do this. You stood once. You can stand again." He would nod, his jaw set, his eyes burning with that stubborn flame. And he would try again. And again. And again. We measured progress in seconds. 5 seconds of supported standing. Then 10. Then 30. His legs shook uncontrollably, his entire body straining, but he was standing. He was upright. Finally, one afternoon, a month after the first twitch in his leg, he managed it. Leaning heavily against the wall, his hands splayed flat against it for support, his legs trembling like leaves in a storm, he stood on his own. It lasted barely more than 10 seconds, but they were the most triumphant 10 seconds of my new life. When his strength gave out and he slumped back into the wheelchair I had positioned behind him, we were both drenched in sweat, gasping for air. He leaned back, his chest heaving, his face flushed with effort. And then he smiled. It wasn't just a twitch of the lips. It was a real, genuine, full-faced smile. It transformed him completely, wiping away the years of bitterness and pain, revealing the handsome, vibrant young man he had been. That smile was like a ray of brilliant sunshine, lighting up the whole room and shining straight into the deepest, coldest corners of my heart. I stood there, breathless, my own smile so wide it hurt my cheeks. "I stood up, Maylin," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Yes," I replied, my eyes misty with tears of joy. "I saw it." From that day on, his road to recovery was officially underway. He practiced standing every day, holding it longer and longer. Slowly, tentatively, he began to try to move his legs, to take steps. With me supporting most of his weight, my body braced against his, we would shuffle across the living room floor. One agonizing step, then another. The sound of his ragged breathing and the slow, heavy scuff of his feet became the soundtrack of our home. The neighbors began to notice. They would see Staff Officer Chin, once a shut-in, now shuffling slowly across the courtyard with his wife's unwavering support. The whispers started again, but this time they were whispers of awe. My God, he can walk again. It's a miracle. That new wife of his, she's amazing. I became the center of attention in the compound, but for entirely different reasons. Mrs. Liu, who had mocked me, now greeted me with a fawning, sycophantic smile, calling me Little Sister Mei Lin, as if we were the dearest of friends. Sister Yang was overjoyed, clasping my hands and praising me to the skies. I accepted it all with a faint smile. Deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't because of me. It was because Jun Qin had never truly given up on himself. I was merely the one who had handed him the match to relight his own fire. The days passed, filled with sweat, pain, and burgeoning hope. Jun Chen's body grew stronger. He could now walk short distances with the aid of crutches. His complexion, once pale and waxy, now had a healthy color. The hollows in his cheeks had filled out, thanks to the nutritious meals I prepared. Our relationship deepened in the quiet moments between the struggles. He began to talk more. He would tell me stories from the army, funny anecdotes about his men, tales of training exercises gone wrong. He shared silly, cherished memories from his childhood. In return, I told him about life at the youth station, carefully editing out any mention of Leo, speaking only of the land, the work, the friendships forged in hardship. We were no longer just two people bound by a transaction. We were becoming companions. Confidants. Though we still slept in separate rooms, the invisible wall between us had not just crumbled. It had been reduced to dust. It was in this new hopeful atmosphere that the past decided to rear its ugly head. I received an unexpected package. The return address was from the city, and the name on it made my blood run cold. Liu Zhang. With trembling hands I opened it. Inside was a polyester dress, a garish, fashionable style for the time, and a letter. The pages were filled with his cramped, familiar handwriting. He poured out endless longing for me, pages of poetic misery. Then he complained. He complained about the city, about his menial job at the factory, about how unsatisfying his life was. He wrote that Clara Wang had changed completely after returning. She looked down on him for being a lowly worker, for his lack of prospects. They quarreled constantly. Their marriage, he confessed, was falling apart. At the end of the letter, the confession came as I knew it would. He still loved me. His biggest regret was giving the return quota to Clara. He would find a way to get a divorce, he wrote, and then he would come back for me. Meilin, wait for me. I'll definitely give you happiness. Staring at the page, I felt nothing but a bitter, cold irony. In my last life, these words would have been my salvation. I would have clung to them, built castles in the air with them, wasted my entire life on them. Now they were just ink on paper, the pathetic whimpering of a man who only wanted what he couldn't have. I didn't bother with a reply. I carried the letter and the cheap, ugly dress to the stove. I watched as the flames caught the paper, curling the edges black, consuming his empty promises and false regrets, turning them into fragile, gray ash that floated up the chimney and vanished into the air. That evening, Jun Qin seemed to sense my subdued mood. I was quieter than usual during dinner, the ghost of that letter lingering in my mind. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low. "Did something happen?" I shook my head, pushing the food around on my plate. "Nothing. I just thought of some unpleasant people from the past." He was silent for a while, watching me. The lamplight cast shadows on his face, which had grown so much more expressive. Finally he spoke, his tone matter-of-fact. "Liu Zhang is no good." I looked at him, startled. "You know him?" "Yes," he nodded, taking a sip of water. "Someone mentioned him to me before. Even while he was with you, he was tangled up with that Clara Wang. This time, too, it was the Wang family pulling strings behind the scenes for his return. He's an opportunist. The kind who will use love as a ladder for his career, and then throw it away when it's no longer useful." My heart clenched, a sharp, painful twist. So he had known. He had known about Leo, about my foolish past all along. He had just never mentioned it, never used it against me. He didn't press me further, didn't demand details. He just looked at me, and in his eyes I saw no judgment, only a quiet, steady understanding, and a faint trace of a pity that wasn't condescending but protective. I took a deep breath, the last of the letter's poison leaving my system. I smiled at him, a real, genuine smile. "It's all in the past. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Now I'm your wife, Jun-chin. He held my gaze for a long, long time, his fingers turning to intertwine with mine. His hand was warm, strong, real. Finally, he nodded slowly, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. Yes, he said, his voice firm. You are. In that moment, surrounded by the simple warmth of our home with his hand in mine, I felt the last of those unbearable memories finally loosen their grip. They faded, becoming distant, inconsequential shadows. The future, our future, was here in this room, being built with every shared struggle, every quiet understanding, and every hard-won step. The summer of 1978 arrived, bringing with it a restless, vibrant energy that seemed to seep through the very walls of our home. The winds of reform and opening up were beginning to whisper, promising a future less rigid, more full of color. And inside our little house, our own personal spring was in full bloom. Jun-chen's progress was no longer a fragile secret. It was a visible, tangible fact. He was walking now properly, with only a slight stiffness in his gait that grew less pronounced with each passing day. The crutches were relegated to a corner, a symbol of a battle won. The pale, hollowed-out man I had married was gone, replaced by a figure of strength and purpose, his shoulders straight, his eyes alight with the confidence of a soldier rediscovering his post. The change did not go unnoticed. One afternoon, a black official car pulled up outside our gate. From it emerged an older man, his posture ramrod straight, his hair shot through with silver, his uniform adorned with the insignia of a senior officer. It was General Zhao, Jun-chen's former commander and the military district's chief of staff. I was in the courtyard hanging laundry when he walked in. I froze, a damp shirt in my hands. Jun-chen was inside, practicing his walking between the living room and the kitchen, unaided. The general didn't see me at first. His eyes were fixed on the figure of his former protégé moving steadily across the room. He stopped dead in his tracks, his hand going to his chest. For a moment, the stern, battle-hardened face crumpled, and his eyes brimmed with tears that he swiftly, brutally blinked away. Jun-chen, he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. Jun-chen turned. Seeing his old commander, he instinctively snapped to attention, his body remembering the drill even after all this time. General. The general strode forward, ignoring me completely, and grabbed Jun-chen by the shoulders, his grip fierce. He looked him up and down, from his steady feet to his clear, focused eyes. They told me, but I didn't believe it. My boy, you're standing. Yes, sir, Jun-chen said, a proud, humble smile touching his lips. The general's gaze then finally swept over to me, still standing by the clothesline. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took me in. The simple clothes, the laundry basket, the humble surroundings. Then he looked back at Jun-chen, at the clean, ordered house, at the man who had risen from the dead. He didn't say a word to me. He didn't need to. The profound gratitude and respect in that single look was more powerful than any flowery speech. He turned back to Jun-chen, his voice returning to its usual commanding boom, though it still held a tremor. Your place is waiting for you, son. The army needs men like you. When can you report back? The reinstatement was immediate. The news that Staff Officer Jun-chen was not only walking but returning to active duty spread through the compound faster than a wildfire. Suddenly, our quiet, often avoided home became the center of the universe. The gate, which had seen so few visitors, now seemed to be in a perpetual state of swinging open. People I had never seen before arrived bearing gifts: expensive tea, imported liquor, fine silks. They were all smiles and effusive praise, their words dripping with a sycophancy that turned my stomach. They were the very same people who had once crossed the street to avoid us, who had whispered "cripple" behind their hands. Now they couldn't fawn over him enough. Jun-chen despised it. I could see the disgust in the tight line of his mouth, the cold distance in his eyes as he endured their hollow pleasantries. After 2 days of this circus, he'd had enough. He summoned young Xiaowang, the orderly. "Station yourself at the gate," he ordered, his voice cutting with the authority I knew he must have wielded on the battlefield. "No more visitors. Tell them I am occupied with my rehabilitation and cannot be disturbed." The house fell blessedly quiet again. Once the silence had settled, he sought me out. I was in the kitchen preparing lunch. "Mei Lin," he said, leaning against the doorframe watching me. "Thank you." I wiped my hands on a cloth and turned to him. "We're husband and wife. You don't need to thank me like a stranger." He stepped forward, his gaze intense, burning into me. He caught my hand, his grip firm and warm. "Men Lin," he said, using my name with a new intimate weight. "Let's not sleep in separate rooms anymore." "Okay." My face flamed, a hot blush spreading from my cheeks down my neck. My heart began to pound, a wild, joyful rhythm against my ribs. I lowered my head, unable to hold his scorching gaze, and whispered a soft, breathless. That night I moved my few things into his room. It was Spartan like the rest of the house, but it held his scent, the essence of him. He held me that night, not with the desperate grip of a drowning man, but with the possessive, tender strength of a man claiming what was his. His kisses were not tentative but hot and fierce, trembling with a passion long suppressed. "Mei Lin." He whispered my name again and again into the darkness, his lips against my skin, my hair, my mouth. "I love you." In the dark, with his arms around me, his heart beating against mine, I smiled through tears of pure, unadulterated joy. After 2 lifetimes of longing and betrayal, I had finally heard a vow spoken from the heart. A real one. With Junshin back at the army, his days were busier than ever. But he was a changed man at home too. He would bring me little gifts from the city. A pretty hair clip, a scented bar of soap, a book of poetry. He would clumsily try to help with housework, his large soldier's hands fumbling with a washcloth or a vegetable knife, making me laugh. And at night he would hold me close, murmuring stories of the barracks, his voice a low, comforting rumble that lulled me to sleep. I didn't stay idle either. The restlessness of the era had infected me too. I didn't want to spend my life defined only as an officer's wife. The memory of my past life, of dying powerless and penniless, was a constant spur. I had my own ambitions. Using a small portion of the connections June's status now afforded, I quietly rented a tiny, narrow storefront on a bustling street in the city. Then, with a resolve that felt like stepping off a cliff, I sold one of my mother's gold bangles. The weight of it in my palm was heavy with memory, but I let it go. It was not a sacrifice for a man's ambition this time. It was an investment in my own. The money became my startup capital. I opened a clothing shop. I called it New Vision. At the time, the sartorial landscape of China was a sea of drab conformity, dull blacks, grays and dark blues, with cuts that hid the body in shapeless anonymity. But I had an advantage. I carried in my mind aesthetics from decades ahead. I saw color, shape and individuality. I designed the clothes myself, sketching feverishly at night after June was asleep. I used bright, bold colors: sapphire blue, emerald green, vibrant coral. I created dresses that cinched at the waist, blouses with elegant collars, trousers that flared slightly at the bottom. I hired a retired seamstress and we worked tirelessly, turning my visions into reality. At first it was a struggle. People were wary. They would peer into the shop window, their eyes wide with shock at the riot of color, then hurry away. The first month I sold almost nothing. The whispers started even here. "Who does she think she is? No respectable woman would wear that." But the times were changing. Soon a trickle of brave young city women began to venture in. They were the daughters of officials, students, young working women hungry for a taste of the world that was slowly opening up. They would try on a dress, their eyes lighting up as they saw their transformed reflection in the mirror. Business began to grow, slowly at first, then gaining momentum until it was a steady, thriving stream. My little shop became the talk of the city, the place for fashionable, modern women to shop. Before long I had earned back my initial investment and then some. I was no longer Mei Lin, the poor educated youth, or even just Mei Lin, the officer's wife. I was Boss Mei, a business owner, a woman making her own way. Junshin supported me wholeheartedly. On his days off he would come to the shop, still in his uniform sometimes, and help me move heavy bolts of fabric or rearrange displays. He never complained, never suggested it was beneath his status. One month he used his entire allowance to buy me an imported, electric sewing machine, a luxury I could only dream of. "My Mei Lin should do what she loves," he told me, his smile proud as he watched me marvel at the machine. With both love and career thriving, I felt like the happiest woman in the world. The ghosts of my past life were silent. The future was a brilliant, open road. It was in this state of hard-won contentment that the past, stubborn and vile, decided to make one last desperate play. I was in the shop one afternoon going over the account books, when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, a polite greeting on my lips, and it died there. It was Clara Wang. Looked terrible. A world away from the delicate, weeping beauty of the village. She was haggard, her face pale and sallow. She wore a faded, outdated dress that hung loosely on her frame. The moment her eyes found me, clean, well-dressed and surrounded by beautiful things, a flash of pure, undiluted hatred twisted her features. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the pitiful, tearful mask I knew so well. "Mei Lin," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't even bother to stand. I looked at her over the top of my ledger, my face a blank slate. "What do you want, Clara?" "Mei Lin, I'm here. I'm here to apologize on Leo's behalf." Her eyes welled up with practiced ease. "Back then it was us who wronged you. After we returned to the city, life has been awful. Leo, he's always thinking about you." I answered with a non-committal hum, lowering my head back to my books as if she were a mildly irritating fly. My indifference clearly flustered her. She stood there for a moment, floundering, before finding her script again. "Mei Lin, Leo can't hold on anymore. The factory is doing poorly. We haven't been paid in months. He's drowning in debt." She took a step forward, her hands clasped in a parody of prayer. Could you lend us some money?" Finally, I looked up, my gaze cold enough to freeze fire. "Clara Wang, are you out of your mind? What does your suffering have to do with me? Why on earth should I give you money?" Her lips trembled and real tears of frustration began to roll down her cheeks. "Leo said you've always had the kindest heart. He said if I came to beg you, you would definitely help." A cold, mirthless laugh escaped me. "He knows the old me very well. Unfortunately, I'm not that foolish girl anymore." I stood up, my voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. "My kindness is expensive. It's not something any random stray can demand." Her face drained of all color, shocked by my venom. She took a deep, shuddering breath, as if steeling herself for a final, dramatic act. Then, with a thud that echoed in the quiet shop, she dropped to her knees. "Mei Lin, I'm begging you," she wailed, the sound grating and ugly. "If you lend us the money, I'll give Leo back to you. We'll get divorced immediately. I know you still love him, don't you?" Her shamelessness was so profound, so utterly absurd that I actually laughed. I laughed until tears stung my own eyes. "Clara Wang," I said, shaking my head in sheer disbelief. "You've just redefined the word shameless for me." I walked out from behind the counter, looking down at her groveling form on my clean floor. "Do you think Liu Zhang is some precious prize everyone's fighting over? To me, he's not even worth the garbage on the roadside." I paused, letting the words sink in, then delivered the final blow clearly and slowly. "I am married. My husband is Jun Chen. He is the best man in this world. I love him more than my own life." I pointed to the door. "So, pack up your pitiful little performance and disappear with Leo from my world. Forever." I didn't wait for a response. I called for the security guard from next door. He came in, his eyes widening at the scene, and efficiently dragged the weeping, wailing Clara out of my shop and into the street. The bell on the door chimed softly as it closed behind them. Silence returned. I stood there, my heart not racing, not aching, but utterly, perfectly calm. Liu Zhang and Clara Wang. Those two names that had once been capable of tearing my world apart were now nothing more than unpleasant smudges on an otherwise bright and beautiful canvas. I had thought after this they would finally be gone for good. But I had underestimated the depths of Leo's delusion and the sheer, unmitigated gall of his selfishness. The past wasn't finished with me yet. It was saving its worst for last. The confrontation with Clara left me feeling scoured clean, as if a festering wound had finally been lanced and drained. The shop felt brighter, the colors of the fabrics more vibrant. I had faced down my past and it had crumbled at my feet. I truly believed that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, Jun Chen was home on leave. A sense of deep, domestic contentment had settled over us. He was sitting at the table, polishing his boots with a soldier's meticulous care, while I prepared a special dinner, a fish I had managed to procure from the market. The smell of ginger and scallions sizzling in hot oil filled the cozy kitchen. It was a perfect, ordinary moment, the kind I had never dared dream of in my previous life. The doorbell rang, a shrill, intrusive sound. "I'll get it," Jun said, setting down his brush and getting to his feet with only the faintest hint of stiffness. I smiled, watching him go. Every time I saw him walk, a little thrill of pride went through me. I heard the door open. There was a moment of silence, then June's voice, cold and formal. "Can I help you?" A voice I had hoped never to hear again rasped in response, horribly familiar. "I'm here for Mei Lin." My blood ran cold. The spatula froze in my hand. June Chen's tone didn't change, but I could feel the ice in it from the kitchen. "Mr. Zhang. Show some respect. Get out of my way." Leo roared, his voice slurred, unhinged. I heard a scuffle and then he burst into the living room, shoving past June Chen. He was a wreck. The handsome, confident youth from the village was gone, replaced by a gaunt, emaciated man. His clothes were ragged and stained, his hair greasy and unkempt. His eyes were the worst, wild, bloodshot and burning with a fanatical light. The moment they landed on me, they turned red with a possessive fury. "Mei Lin," he rasped, and he lunged toward me, his hand outstretched as if to grab me. But Junchen was faster. He moved with the speed and precision of the soldier he was, stepping between us like an immovable mountain. He didn't shove or shout. He simply stood there, a wall of solid, disciplined strength, his presence itself a command to halt. "Get out of my way," Leo snarled again, spittle flying from his lips. "This is between me and Mei Lin. What does it have to do with a cripple like you?" The word, cripple, hung in the air, ugly and venomous. June Chen's expression didn't flicker, but I saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. A cold fury began to simmer in my veins, eclipsing my initial shock. Afraid he might lose the control he held so tightly, I quickly stepped out from behind him. I looked at Leo, at this pathetic broken shell of a man, and felt nothing but a profound, weary disgust. "What are you doing here, Leo?" My voice was flat, devoid of all the emotion he so clearly craved. "Come with me, Mei Lin." His eyes were desperate, pleading, but with a mad intensity that was frightening. "I know you didn't marry him with a true heart. You're just angry with me. I know you still love me. Let's start over." "Okay." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. "Liu Zhang, are you out of your mind?" "I'm not crazy," he cried, his voice cracking. "Mei Lin, I don't want anything else. My job, my future, I'll give it all up. I just want you. Let's leave here. Go somewhere no one knows us and begin again." He spoke as if he were a romantic hero making a grand, tragic sacrifice. But all I heard was the same selfishness, the same cowardice that had always defined him. He wasn't offering me a future. He was running from his own failure and trying to drag me down with him. "Start over." I sneered, the bitterness of 2 lifetimes sharpening my tongue. "Did you forget? It was you who pushed me away for the sake of your future. Now that you've failed in the city, now that your life is in ruins, you remember me again? What do you take me for? A spare tire you can use and discard at will?" "No, Mei Lin. Listen to me, I can explain." "Enough." I cut him off sharply, my voice like a whip crack. I was done. So utterly done. "I don't want to hear a single word from you. Liu Zhang, the best decision I ever made in this life was leaving you and marrying June Chen." I pointed a trembling finger toward the door. "Now get out of my house. I never want to see you again." My words were knives and they found their mark. His face, already pale, turned ashen. His body swayed and he muttered in shock, "No, no, Mei Lin, you're lying to me, aren't you?" It was then that the stress, the disgust, the sheer emotional violence of the encounter hit me physically. A sudden, overwhelming wave of nausea surged up from my stomach. I clapped a hand over my mouth, gagging uncontrollably, my body buckling. All 3 of us froze. Leo's face, already ashen, drained to a sickly gray. The frantic light in his eyes guttered and died, replaced by a dawning, horrified comprehension. Junchen, meanwhile, was stunned for only a second. Then an overwhelming, incandescent joy burst into his eyes. He was at my side in an instant, his arm around my waist, supporting me, his voice trembling with a hope so fierce it was almost painful. "Mei Lin," he looked at me, realization dawning on his face. "Are you?" I understood too. My hand went to my stomach. My monthly cycle was already nearly 2 months late. In the whirlwind of the shop and June's recovery, I had put it down to stress. But now, with this sudden, undeniable physical reaction, the truth became glaringly obvious. I might be pregnant. This sudden, miraculous revelation was the final, brutal blow to Leo. He looked at Junshin holding me, at the unspoken intimacy and fierce protectiveness in the gesture, at the dazed, hopeful look on my face. The last shred of his delusion was torn away. The light in his eyes dimmed, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but a hollow, broken darkness. "So, it's true," he whispered, the words a death rattle. He stepped back as if struck. A broken, twisted smile, uglier than any tears, stretched across his face. "You really love him. And you're carrying his child." It was as if all the strings holding him up had been cut. He crumpled in on himself, his shoulders slumping, his head bowing. "It's my fault," he repeated over and over, a broken record of regret. "It's all my fault." Then, without another word, he turned and staggered away, a lost soul vanishing into the gathering twilight, the door swinging shut behind him. At last the house was quiet again. The tension shattered, replaced by a breathless, trembling hope. Junshin swept me into his arms, lifting me high and spinning me around the living room in sheer, unadulterated delight. He laughed, a rich, unrestrained, boyish sound I had never heard from him before. "Mei Lin, I'm going to be a father. We're going to have a baby." I grew dizzy from his spinning, laughing and crying at the same time, beating lightly on his broad chest. "Put me down. Be careful of the baby." He stopped at once as if waking from a dream and gently, reverently set me down on the sofa. Then he dropped to one knee in front of me, his movements full of a raw, earnest wonder. He pressed his ear against my still flat belly, his face a picture of pure, unadulterated reverence and joy. "Mei Lin," he whispered, his voice thick. He lifted his head and I saw his eyes were rimmed with red. "Thank you." He swallowed hard, his gaze holding mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "Thank you for being willing to marry me. Thank you for being willing to give me a child. You and our baby, you are the most precious treasures of my life." I cupped his face in my hands, my heart so full it felt like it would burst. Tears of happiness streamed down my cheeks. "Yes," I whispered back. "Liu Zhang, you were wrong. You never knew how to cherish me. The happiness you tossed away so carelessly." I looked into Junshin's loving, steadfast eyes. "Is what we hold as priceless." From that day forward, my status in our home was elevated to something akin to a national treasure. Junshin wouldn't hear of me tiring myself at the shop. He immediately hired 2 experienced, trustworthy clerks to manage the day-to-day business. He took over the household chores himself, despite my protests, learning to cook and clean with a soldier's determination, preparing me different nutritious dishes every day. When the news spread through the compound that I was pregnant, our home was flooded once more with visitors, but this time their joy felt genuine. They came with blessings, with tonics, with hand-knitted booties. Sister Yang was a constant, cheerful presence, stopping by to chat and share endless streams of parenting advice. Even Junshin's parents, all the way in the capital, sent large parcels of baby supplies and called frequently, their voices crackling with excitement over the phone, reminding their son to take good care of me. I was cherished, coddled, held in the palm of everyone's hand. It was a far cry from the lonely, forgotten death I had known. As my belly grew, a gentle, visible curve beneath my clothes, Junshin developed a new ritual. Every night before we slept, he would press his face against my stomach and whisper to our baby, "Little one, I'm your daddy. Be good. Don't make your mommy suffer. When you come out, daddy will teach you so many things." Watching this man, once as cold and hard as granite, speak with such tender, foolish gentleness always made my heart swell with a love so profound it ached. He was convinced I was carrying a daughter. "A girl," he would say, his hand resting on my belly. "A girl who will be just like you. Beautiful and smart and strong." I too was filled with a quiet, powerful expectation. This new life was the crystallization of our love, the physical proof of our happiness, the definitive seal on my new destiny. In the spring of 1979 I gave birth. The pain was searing, all-consuming, but Junshin was there, his hand in mine, his voice a steady anchor throughout the long hours. And when the final triumphant cry echoed in the delivery room, the midwife beamed at us. "Congratulations. It's a healthy baby boy." He wasn't the daughter June had imagined, but the moment they placed the squalling, red-faced infant in his arms, my husband turned into a grinning, weeping fool. He showered our son with kisses, his large hands holding the tiny bundle with an awe that was beautiful to behold. We named him Chinan. And for peace. We wished for him a life of safety, stability and joy, a life free from the struggles that had defined our own beginnings. His arrival filled our home with a new kind of music, the sound of a baby's cry, of lullabies, of Jun Chen's deep, rumbling laughter. He became a complete child slave. Whenever he was home, he refused to let go of our son. He changed diapers with a comical, intense concentration, prepared bottles and walked the floor with an in his arms at all hours, singing off-key army marching songs as lullabies. He was, to my endless amusement, more skillful at it than I was. Meanwhile, my clothing business, New Vision, continued to flourish. With the capital I had accumulated and an eye for the shifting market, I opened 2 more shops in the city. Then I took the biggest leap yet. I founded my own small garment factory. I created a brand under my own name, May, and soon our clothes were being sold in department stores across the province. I was no longer just a shop owner. I was becoming a well-known businesswoman. Jun Chen, too, was rising rapidly through the military ranks. His brilliant mind, his leadership, and the sheer force of his will, forged anew in the fires of his recovery, carried him from battalion commander to regimental commander in what seemed like the blink of an eye. He was hailed as the youngest, most promising officer in the district. We had become the model family, the couple everyone in the compound envied and admired. A husband with a boundless future, a wife with a thriving career and a lively, beloved son. Our life was a vibrant tapestry woven from threads of struggle, hope and deep, abiding love. Often, in the quiet moments watching June play with our son or looking over the accounts of my growing enterprise, I would think to myself, if the me from my previous life, the one who froze to death in the snow, full of despair and betrayal, could see this, she would think it an impossible, unreachable dream. But it was real. I had done it. I had clutched the second chance I was given with both hands, and I had changed my fate. I had seized the happiness that was always meant to be mine. The cry of our son, Chin-en, was not just the sound of a new life. It was the fanfare for a new era in our own. The small, red-faced bundle with a shock of dark hair became the sun around which our entire world revolved. Jun Chen, the battle-hardened officer, melted into a puddle of gooey devotion the moment he held his son. I often found him simply staring at the baby asleep in his crib, his expression one of such naked wonder it brought fresh tears to my eyes. "He has your eyes, Mei Lin," he would whisper, his finger gently tracing the baby's cheek. "And your stubborn chin," I'd reply, smiling. The rhythm of our days was now set to the demands of an infant. Sleepless nights, the warm, milky scent of his skin, the tiny, perfect grip of his hand around my finger. It was an exhausting, exhilarating whirlwind. Junchen was my rock. Despite his increasing responsibilities at the army base, he insisted on sharing the load. He was a surprisingly natural father, his large, capable hands deft at diapering and burping, his deep voice a soothing balm to our son's nighttime fussing. My clothing business, New Vision, continued to thrive even in my absence. The 2 clerks I had hired, a pair of sharp-eyed, ambitious young women, managed the shop with impressive competence. They sent weekly reports and profits which grew steadily. The success was a quiet, personal triumph. It was mine, built with my own vision and my mother's bangle. It was a part of me that existed independently of being Jun Chen's wife or Anne's mother. One afternoon while Anne was napping, I spread the account books and design sketches across the living room floor. The numbers were good, better than good. The demand for my designs was outstripping what my single seamstress and I could produce in the back of the shop. An idea, a terrifying and thrilling one, had been germinating in my mind for weeks. Jun Chen came home early, still in his uniform, his boots quiet on the floor. He knelt beside me, his gaze sweeping over the sketches of elegant dresses and tailored jackets. "The business is doing well," he stated, his voice warm with pride. "It is," I said, my heart beginning to beat a little faster. "So well that I have an idea. A big one." He looked at me, his expression open and encouraging. "Tell me." I took a deep breath. "I want to open a factory. A small one to start. We could hire more seamstresses, produce our clothes in larger quantities. We could create our own brand. A real brand with a label." I pointed to one of my sketches. "We could call it May." There was a moment of silence. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. This was not the modest ambition of a village wife. This was the dream of a businesswoman. A slow, proud smile spread across his face. It was the same smile he had given me when he took his first unaided steps. Then do it, he said as if it were the most simple, obvious thing in the world. It will require more capital, I said cautiously. I'll need to sell the other bangle. My mother's last bangle. The final, physical tether to my past. The thought sent a pang through me, but it was a clean pain like cutting a cord. Jun Chen's hand covered mine. That bangle helped bring you to me. It's done its duty. Let it help you build your future now. Our future. His unwavering support was a wind in my sails. Within a month I had sold the bangle. The sum was substantial. With it I leased a small vacant workshop on the outskirts of the city and purchased 10 second-hand sewing machines. I hired 15 women from the surrounding neighborhoods. Some were army wives looking for extra income. Others were skilled workers laid off from state-owned factories that were struggling to adapt to the new economic climate. I trained them myself, teaching them my techniques, my standards for quality. The May garment factory was born. The constant rhythmic whir of sewing machines became the soundtrack of my days when I wasn't caring for an. It was chaotic and challenging. There were issues with fabric supply, with quality control, with managing the women. But it was alive. It was growth. Jun Chen, now promoted to regimental commander, was busier than ever, but he found ways to help. He used his logistical knowledge to help me streamline the supply chain for my fabrics. He even, to my endless amusement, used his influence to help me secure a contract to supply uniforms for the female staff at his division headquarters. It was my first large stable order. It's not favoritism, he said with a sly grin. It's just good business. Your designs are better and your prices are more competitive than the state supplier. Our lives were a whirlwind of dual pursuits. His career in the military, mine in business. Our home was the calm, loving center of the storm. We would put into bed together, then sit at the table, he with his military reports, I with my factory ledgers, our knees touching under the table, a silent communion of shared purpose. One evening he looked up from his papers. The world is changing, Mei Lin. Faster than I ever thought possible. I know, I said, thinking of the new policies, the whispers of private enterprise no longer being a dirty word. It's our time. It's your time, he corrected gently, his eyes full of love and respect. You saw it coming. You were ready. As I grew from a baby into a toddling, babbling boy, my business grew with him. The May brand began to gain a reputation beyond our city. Our clothes, with their unique blend of modern cuts and subtle, elegant details, found a market among the new class of urban professionals. We opened a small showroom in the provincial capital. The profits from the factory allowed me to buy a truck for deliveries, and I hired a manager, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Lao Li, to handle the day-to-day operations of the workshop. I was no longer just a shop owner. I was an employer, a business owner. The feeling of power and independence was intoxicating. It was a far cry from the powerless, penniless girl who had frozen in the snow. One day when I was about 3 years old, I took him to the factory with me. He sat on a blanket in my office playing with wooden blocks while I met with Lao Li. Through the glass window we could see the rows of women at their machines, focused and diligent. Business is good, Boss May, Lao Li said, pushing his glasses up his nose. But the competition is getting fiercer. There are 2 other private garment workshops that have opened in the last 6 months. They're copying your styles, selling them for less. I looked out at my workers, at the stacks of finished clothes ready to be shipped. Copying was inevitable. I had expected it. Then we won't compete on price alone, I said, my mind already racing. We'll compete on quality. On brand. We'll use better fabrics. We'll add unique details they can't easily copy. I turned to him, a new idea forming. And we'll start a line of children's clothes. Little May. Starting with him. I nodded toward my son, who was now trying to stack a block on top of his head. Lao Li smiled. A good idea. The one-child policy. Every child is a prince or princess now. Parents will spend. It was true. The world was changing and I was changing with it, adapting, growing. I was building something that would last, something I could one day pass on to my son. That night I told Jun Chen about the new children's line. He was bathing in the bathroom, filled with steam, and the little boy's giggles as his father made a toy boat zoom through the water. A children's line? Jun Chen said, soaping Anne's hair. So my son will be a model? The first model, I said, leaning against the doorframe, my heart full. And sensing he was the topic of conversation, looked up with his big dark eyes so like his father's. Mama. Boat. Junchin looked from our son to me, his expression soft in the steamy light. You amaze me, Maylin. Every single day. In that moment, surrounded by the simple, profound happiness of my family, I felt the final lingering shadows of my past life dissolve completely. The memory of Liu Zhang was like a story about someone else, a sad tale from a forgotten book. The future I was building, the factory, the brand, this loving home with my husband and son, was no longer a desperate escape from a terrible fate. It was a life I was actively, joyfully creating. Brick by brick, stitch by stitch, I was laying the foundation for a dynasty, and I was doing it on my own terms. Time, which had once dragged through the frozen, hopeless days of my first life, now seemed to accelerate, a swift river carrying us into the heart of the 1980s. The world outside our door was transforming at a dizzying pace. The whispers of reform became a confident conversation, and the gray conformity of the past was slowly being painted over with bold, entrepreneurial color. My life, once a narrow, desperate path, had exploded into a vast and vibrant landscape. Chinam was no longer a baby. At 5 years old, he was a whirlwind of energy and questions, with his father's strong features and a stubborn curiosity that was all his own. He was the undisputed center of our universe. Junchin, now a division chief of staff, carried the weight of his command with a quiet authority, but at home he shed his rank like a uniform, becoming a doting father who would get on his hands and knees to play tanks with his son, using Anne's wooden blocks for fortifications. My May brand had not just survived, it had flourished. The children's line, Little May, had been a resounding success. Seeing well-dressed toddlers in my designs, their outfits miniature echoes of their parents' modern style, filled me with a fierce, proprietary pride. The factory had expanded, swallowing the workshop next door, its hum a constant, productive heartbeat in my life. I now employed over 50 people, mostly women, and I took a fierce pride in providing them with stable jobs and fair wages. I was no longer just Boss May. I was Director Chin, a respected figure in the city's nascent business community. Our home had changed too. We had moved out of the small compound house where our fragile love had first taken root and into the general's residence, a spacious 2-story home with a real garden. It was a symbol of how far we had come. But the heart of our home remained the same, a place of warmth, of shared quiet moments after hectic days, of Junchen's deep laughter and Anne's infectious giggle. One crisp autumn day, I was at the factory, going over the samples for our spring collection with my head designer, a talented young man named Xiao Lu who I had poached from a state-owned enterprise. He was passionate, full of new ideas about Western fashion trends he read about in smuggled magazines. Director Chin, he said, holding up a sketch of a dress with pronounced shoulder pads and a sharp, tailored line. This is the look now. Powerful. Confident. The career woman is the new ideal. I studied the sketch. It was a world away from the flowing feminine dresses I had first designed. It was bold, almost aggressive. It reflected the changing aspirations of Chinese women, who were now stepping out of the fields and factories and into offices, into boardrooms. I like it, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. It's different. It's what's next. I thought of my own journey from a powerless educated youth to a business owner. This dress embodied that transition. Let's produce it in that deep emerald green. And the red. Make a statement. As Xiao Lu hurried off, excited, my secretary tapped on the office door. Director Chen, there's a man here to see you. A Mr. Wang from Shenzhen. Shenzhen. The very name was electric, a synonym for the dizzying economic transformation happening in the South. It was a special economic zone, a place of frantic construction and boundless opportunity. I had never done business there. Send him in, I said, smoothing down my own dress, a simple but elegant navy blue design from my own collection. Mr. Wang was a compact, energetic man in a sharp suit, his handshake firm, his eyes missing nothing. He complimented the factory, my designs, my obvious acumen. Then he got to the point. Director Chen, I represent a consortium of investors in Shenzhen. We're building a new department store, the largest in the city. We want to feature the best domestic brands. We want May to have a flagship concession on the ground floor. My heart skipped a beat. A flagship store in Shenzhen. It was an opportunity one hadn't even dared to dream of. It would catapult my brand onto a national stage. The terms are very favorable, Mr. Wong continued, sliding a contract across my desk. We handle the store build-out, the staffing. You supply the inventory. We split the revenue 60-40 in your favor. The numbers were staggering. It was a risk, a huge one. The logistics of supplying a store so far away, the uncertainty of a new market. But the potential reward. It was a door swinging open to a future I could barely comprehend. I'm very interested, Mr. Wong, I said, keeping my voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I'll need to review the contract with my lawyer and discuss it with my family. Of course, he said, smiling. The new China waits for no one, Director Chin. I hope you will join us. That evening I laid the contract out on our large dining table. Jun Chin listened intently as I explained the opportunity, his brow furrowed in concentration. And was building a complex structure with his blocks at our feet, providing a soft domestic soundtrack to a conversation that felt like it could alter the course of our lives. Shenzhen is a gamble, Jun Chin said finally, his tone measured. It's a gold rush. Some strike it rich. Many lose everything. I know, I said, my fingers tracing on the paper. But the May brand is strong. Our quality is proven. This isn't a gamble on a whim, June. This is a strategic expansion. It's the logical next step. He was quiet for a long time, looking from the contract to me to our son playing on the floor. I knew what he was thinking. He was a soldier, a strategist. He understood logistics, supply lines, calculated risk. But he was also a husband and father. This would mean I would be traveling, that my attention would be divided even further. Papa, look. And held up his block tower, which was leaning precariously. It's a skyscraper. Like in the picture book. Jun Chen's gaze softened as he looked at our son. He then turned back to me, a slow, decisive light in his eyes. You have built all of this from a single gold bangle and a rented shop, he said. You have never been wrong about the direction of the wind. He reached across the table and took my hand. If you believe this is the right move, then we will make it. The army has connections in the south. I can make some calls, ensure your shipments aren't delayed by bureaucracy. Tears of gratitude and love pricked my eyes. His support was not just emotional, it was practical, powerful. He was using his influence to clear a path for my ambition. I'll have Lao Li go down first, I said, my mind already racing with plans. He can oversee the setup. I'll go once the store is ready to open. 3 months later, I stood in the gleaming marble-lined interior of the New Century department store in Shenzhen. The air smelled of new paint and possibility. The May flagship store was a vision of modern elegance, my clothes artfully displayed under bright lights. A crowd gathered outside for the grand opening. There were reporters, photographers. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was wearing one of the new, powerful shouldered dresses in emerald green. I looked like the career woman Xiao Lu had sketched. I felt like her. The ribbon was cut. The doors opened. A flood of well-dressed, eager shoppers poured in. I watched as women my age and younger touched the fabrics, held up dresses to themselves in the mirrors, their eyes alight with the same hunger for beauty and self-expression that had driven me all those years ago. Lao Li, looking slightly overwhelmed but immensely proud, navigated the crowd to my side. It's a success, Director Chin. A complete success. I just nodded, unable to speak. I was watching a dream I hadn't even known I possessed come to life in a city that itself was a dream, rising from fishing villages to skyscrapers in a handful of years. That night in my hotel room I called home. Jun Chin answered after the first ring. Well? He asked, his voice warm with anticipation. It's incredible, June, I breathed, the emotion finally breaking through. They love the clothes. They sold out of 3 styles in the first hour. I could hear his smile through the phone. I never doubted it for a moment. In the background I heard Anne's little voice. Mama, did you see the big buildings? Yes, my love, I said, my voice thick. I saw them. And one day I'll bring you here to see them too. Hanging up the phone, I stood at the window of my high-rise hotel, looking down at the neon-lit streets of Shenzhen, a city that never slept, a monument to relentless progress. The journey that had begun in a frozen village, born from betrayal and despair, had led me here to this pinnacle of a new world. The past was not just a memory, It was a fossil buried deep beneath the foundations of the life I had built. And the future, our future, stretched out before me as bright and limitless as the lights of the city below. A decade can feel like a lifetime or the blink of an eye. For me it was both. The 1980s bled into the 90s, a vibrant, chaotic and prosperous blur. The shy, determined hope that had characterized the early years of reform had solidified into a roaring, unstoppable engine of change. And our family was carried along on its crest. Chinnan was no longer a little boy. At 15 he was tall and lanky, all sharp elbows and quiet intensity. He had inherited his father's disciplined bearing and my stubborn focus, a combination that made him both a model student and a fiercely independent young man. His childhood fascination with his father's world had crystallized into a single-minded ambition. He was going to be a soldier. He spent his free time running drills in the garden, his face a mask of concentration, or poring over military history books Junchin brought home for him. The wooden blocks were long gone, replaced by model tanks and aircraft, meticulously assembled and painted. My Mei empire had grown beyond my wildest imaginings. The flagship store in Shenzhen had been the key that unlocked the nation. We now had Mei boutiques in a dozen major cities, and our garments were sold in department stores from Harbin to Guangzhou. The small factory was now a large modern manufacturing complex, employing hundreds. I had a design team, a marketing department, a logistics division. I was no longer just a business owner. I was the CEO of a nationally recognized brand. The girl who had once bartered for a piece of cured pork was now negotiating contracts with international fabric suppliers. Junchin had risen as well. The promising young officer was now General Chin, a high-ranking commander whose name was spoken with respect throughout the military district. The weight of command sat easily on his shoulders, but the cold, broken man I had married was a distant memory. At home he was simply June, a devoted husband and a proud, if sometimes bemused, father to a teenager hurtling toward manhood. The lines on his face were etched not by bitterness, but by laughter and the sun. We had left the general's residence for an even more spacious home, one befitting his rank and my success. It was a beautiful house, filled with light and the artifacts of our life together. Photographs of and growing up, awards June had received, the first May dress I had ever sewn, framed and hanging in my study. It was a life of comfort, of security, of deep, abiding love. Often, I would pause in the middle of my hectic days, looking out at our manicured garden, and a wave of quiet disbelief would wash over me. This was my life. This was real. The day of June's official promotion ceremony was a bright, crisp autumn morning. The military compound was decked out in flags, the air buzzing with a formal, celebratory energy. As his family and I were guests of honor, seated in the front row, I watched my husband, resplendent in his dress uniform, his back straight, his voice firm as he accepted his new commission. My heart swelled with a pride so profound it was almost painful. And sat beside me, his young face a mirror of that pride, his eyes fixed on his father with unwavering admiration. After the ceremony there was a reception. We mingled with other officers and their families, accepting congratulations, and was soon surrounded by a group of other officers' sons, all of them looking at him with a mixture of envy and respect. The general's son, who was as sharp and disciplined as his father. Finally we extricated ourselves, the three of us deciding to walk home through the compound to enjoy the afternoon sun. We were a picture of success, of familial bliss. June had his arm around me and walking a little ahead, his hands in his pockets, already carrying himself with a soldier's posture. As we approached the main gates of the compound, my eyes caught on a figure huddled in a corner, a stark, dissonant note in the orderly, prosperous scene. It was an old man, or at least a man aged far beyond his years. His hair was a matted, greasy gray, his clothes ragged and stained. He was squatting on the ground, hunched over, ravenously gnawing on a blackened steamed bun he had fished out of a nearby trash bin. A young guard, looking embarrassed and annoyed, was approaching him, likely to shoo him away from the prestigious entrance. "Hey, you can't be here." The vagrant looked up, his movements jerky. Our eyes met across the short distance. Time seemed to slow, then snap back into place with a sickening jolt. I knew that face. It was weathered, etched with deep lines of hardship and neglect, the skin leathery and dirty. But beneath the grime and the ravages of a hard life, the ghost of the handsome young man from the village was still there, a cruel parody of the past. Liu Zhang. I had never imagined I would see him again. And certainly not like this. When he recognized me, a transformation came over him. The dull, hopeless murk in his eyes was burned away by a sudden, desperate, almost insane brightness. He dropped the rotten bun as if it were on fire and scrambled toward us, half crawling, half stumbling, his movements clumsy and pathetic. Mei Lin! Mei Lin! He cried, his voice a frantic, broken screech. In an instant Junchen was in front of me, his body a shield. He didn't need to say a word. His stance alone was an impenetrable wall. The guards, alerted by the commotion, rushed forward and pinned the struggling Leo to the ground. Let me go. I came for Mei Lin. He screamed, thrashing wildly against their hold, his eyes wild and fixed on me over Junchen's shoulder. I stood calmly behind my husband, my arm slipping naturally through his. I watched the scene unfold not with fear, but with a distant, clinical pity. This was the grand finale of a tragedy that had ended for me long ago. His face was streaked with dirt and tears of a regret that had come decades too late. Mei Lin, I know I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. Please forgive me. Can't we start over? The words tumbled out, incoherent, drenched in a pleading that was as ugly as it was pathetic. By now, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered, officers, their families, compound staff. They whispered and pointed at the raving, filthy man being restrained on the ground, a stark contrast to the impeccable general and his elegant wife. I gazed at this pitiful, broken shell of a human being. I searched my heart, probing for any remnant of the love, the hatred, the pain he had once caused. I found nothing. Not a spark of anger, not an ember of sorrow. He was simply nothing. A stranger whose path had disastrously intersected with mine a lifetime ago. I looked up at Junchen, at the strong, clean line of his jaw, at the steady, protective love in his eyes. I gave him a small, genuine smile, a silent communication that passed between us in an instant. Then, without sparing the wretch on the ground a single backward glance, I turned with my husband and my son and we walked away. We stepped into the waiting military-plated car. As the driver pulled away from the curb, Leo's cries of despair faded behind us, swallowed by the sounds of the city, the hum of progress, the heartbeat of the new life we had built. I rested my head against Junchen's shoulder, feeling the solid, reassuring strength of him. Outside the window, the city rushed by, tall buildings, bustling streets, a world of endless possibility. My heart was not troubled. It was filled with a profound, unshakable peace. And sitting across from us was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Mother, who was that man?" Junchen and I exchanged a look. A whole history, 2 lifetimes of pain and redemption, passed between us in that single glance. "He was no one, and," I said softly, reaching out to smooth my son's hair. "Just a man from a very long time ago." I turned back to the window, watching the future unfold before us. Liu Zhang. You will never understand. The moment I chose to turn away from you on that frozen village square, a gulf as vast as mountains and oceans had opened between us. 2 lifetimes, and you were nothing more than a dusty, forgotten chapter in a book I had already closed. My story was here in this car with my husband's hand in mine and my son's future ahead of him. It was a story of victory, written not with empty promises, but with struggle, with love, and with the unwavering courage to seize a second chance. The car moved forward, carrying us home. The end.